It's time for the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast.
On this edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast, we have Week 6 NFL headlines for you, plus fantasy football files as always with Jason Kamlowski, a playoff baseball update, and so much more. You don't want to miss this episode. Stay tuned.
I'm glad you connected. This is Dave Johnson, voice of the Washington Wizards. You have connected to the right place because you are listening to my man, Josh Kirby, on Sports Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast. As always, I am your host, Josh Kirby. As always, we're part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network. Make sure to find Quinn and his team, www.mayoplease.com, and on Twitter at the Mayo Please. As always, we're sponsored by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you find a bag today inside your local Martin's Food Line and Giant stores. And as always, we are sponsored by PM Plus Reserve. So thank you to them. Also, big thanks to MPT Now Productions, Dave Johnson, and JR Beats Official for everything they do for this podcast. We're rolling right along here, and what a week of football it has been. Week 6, we have a lot of headlines to get to, a lot of stuff to talk about, so let's dive right in. And the first thing I want to talk about, two teams who started the season off great, they're going downhill fast. And I'm talking about the Los Angeles Rams and the Dallas Cowboys. Both teams have dropped 3 straight. So looking at the Los Angeles Rams first, this is a big shocker to me. They started off strong at 3-1 during the season, and they take a huge hit from behind. I wasn't expecting this. Losing to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 55-40. Then in week 5, they go ahead and lose to Seattle by a point on Thursday night. And here you are, week 6. They lose to the undefeated San Francisco 49ers 20-7. A game where Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay used to coach together in Washington. Now they're facing against each other, and I'm very surprised by this. And well, I'll get into San Francisco being undefeated in a little bit, but I'm very, very, very surprised that the Rams dropped 3 straight, because the Rams looked like a great team, and they're just not playing up to standards, you know? Like, you're looking here, Jared Goff isn't putting up near as many numbers as you have seen him in previous games. And, I mean, their run game just looked non-existent. So it's just a matter of how are you going to turn things around at this point? And I was talking about last week, should the Browns hit the panic button? Is it time for the Rams to possibly hit the panic button and try to salvage this season to try to get into the playoffs? So, interesting thing there. How is Sean McVay going to handle this? Because Sean McVay, he is a very young head coach in the league still. One of the youngest, behind Zach Taylor now, I think, now that he's a new head coach in the league. But it was crazy to see. And moving right into the 49ers, they're just looking like a come-from-the-behind sleeper team. And they're undefeated. They are 5-0. And It's crazy to see Kyle Shanahan after a terrible season he had last year to turn things around. And funny fact, the only two teams in the NFL that are defeated at this point are the New England Patriots with Tom Brady under center and the 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo under center. And both of those quarterbacks used to play on the same team, starter-backup combo. So that was an interesting stat to see. San Francisco looks great, though. I mean, I'm not sure if I'd call them the best in the NFC yet. Some people are saying, who is the best team in the NFC? Because this season, there hasn't been a clear front runner for the best team in the NFC. I mean, obviously, you look at Seattle and, yeah, they're playing decent. They're 5-1, and that could be a front runner, but still you have the 49ers undefeated. But the NFC is looking very, very surprising and sort of weak, in my opinion, this season. So that's what made this week so interesting. And another game you look at, the Dallas Cowboys losing to the winless New York Jets. Sam Darnold's first game back since week 1 after being out with mono. And give you the stats on Sam Darnold. He had 338 yards with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. And Dak Prescott, he didn't fire a touchdown or an interception that game. And, man. And let me just talk about Dallas's kicker, Brett Maher. Going into halftime, he kicks a 62-yarder, but then when it really counts, there's a 40-yard field goal that he ends up missing. So that was sort of surprising to me. Their kicker is inconsistent, putting up points that they needed. And Dallas, there's a problem in Dallas, and I think that's why Jerry Jones is hesitant to re-sign Dak Prescott and re-sign their coach, Jason Garrett. Jason Garrett's contract is up at the end of this regular season, and Dak's is up at the end of this season too. So there are questions that should be answered in Dallas, and I'm not sure how they are being answered. But it's going to be interesting to see next week, this Sunday night matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys, if they can get the job done next week. And this is another team I'm questioning, should they hit the panic button. So a lot of teams are not looking good, who, in my opinion, I would think should look good at week 6 in the NFL season. Other storylines that pop out to me, Atlanta Falcons, why are you keeping Matt Bryant? Why? He missed an extra point to tie the game, and the Arizona Cardinals beat you by a point because Matt Bryant could not make an extra point. That's just crazy to me. Matt Bryant retired but came out of retirement to play this season. So yeah, another thing, I mean, the Falcons just bit themselves there by Matt Bryant missing the extra point. Everything else for the Falcons looked pretty good. Matt Ryan spot on with 4 touchdowns, but still, and the running game for the Falcons still looks non-existent in my opinion with Devontae Freeman. He is underperforming, in my opinion. So, why do you have him? That's my only question. Why do you have Matt Bryant? I don't know. But Teddy Bridgewater and the Saints, moving over to the Saints-Jaguars game, still looking good. It wasn't a high-scoring game, 13-6. The Saints move on to 5-1, but Teddy Bridgewater looks like he is doing a great job in place of Drew Brees. So we'll talk about the Tank Bowl next, because why not? The Redskins and Bill Callahan's debut as interim head coach. Redskins, they looked decent. Keenum had 2 touchdowns. Peterson ran for 118 yards, and they ran the football. They stuck to the run game, and they gave Peterson the ball. Jay Gruden shied away from that, but Adrian Peterson got the football, got the work in, and they got it done. They got the job done. But Terry McLaurin, he looked great as well. But the thing, in my opinion, the Redskins did not play well in that game. I mean, they played decent, their running game, their receiving core, and Case Keenum looked all right. But the thing is, they're playing the 0-5 Miami Dolphins at the time, and they still are down by, like, what was it here? They're up 7-3 at halftime. So, like, seriously, you can't score more points against the Dolphins. But then the Redskins go up 10-0 in the third quarter. Then in the fourth quarter, Josh Rosen gets benched after reports are saying Josh Rosen will be the starter for the rest of the season. Getting benched for Ryan Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick puts up 13 points. And, well, touchdown, and they're down by a point. The Dolphins decide to go for 2, and a terrible play call by whoever is calling the plays in Miami. I assume which is Brian Flores. But, wow. Like, you just throw a screen pass and the guy drops it. And the onside kick gets recovered by the Redskins, and you have a 17-16 Redskins win. Redskins' first win of the season. So Miami is struggling. I'm going to say that. Miami is really struggling. The Redskins are trying to salvage the season. There were some promising stats I liked in Peterson and McLaurin still, but a lot to work on for both teams, and the Tank Bowl was nothing less than a back-and-forth close game between two terrible teams. Kansas City, another team, should they hit the panic button. Patrick Mahomes and his ankle injury. Reports are saying his ankle is getting re-aggravated. So I'm not sure if that had anything to do with the loss. 31-24. Houston 4-2 on the season with that victory, and Carlos Hyde. What a game he had. 26 carries, 116 yards. Deshaun Watson, not the best game with 2 interceptions. But the Chiefs, this was a close game, but I thought the Chiefs would bounce back, because, the Chiefs last week, they lost to Indianapolis in Week 5, and I thought they would be hungry to get a win after losing, but they dropped 2 straight. So another team in the AFC, which I think they're struggling, and Patrick Mahomes' health is going to play a big factor into next week's game, in my opinion. And they're on a short week, too, against Denver on Thursday night. So Pat Mahomes, will he be healthy for that Thursday night game? The Broncos aren't the best team, but with Patrick Mahomes out, I'm not sure. I cannot guarantee that the Kansas City Chiefs will get that win. As you know, Denver won, and they improved to 2-4 against the Tennessee Titans, who lost 16-0. But that's going to be a short week for Kansas City, and by the reports saying that Patrick Mahomes has an injured ankle, it's going to be interesting to see what plays out. If he decides to play, limit himself on the mobility a little bit, I'm not sure, but that's going to be a game to look out for Week 7. You have Pittsburgh with their third-string quarterback, Delvin Hodges, against the struggling Chargers, 2-4 on the season, and Steelers come away with the victory 24-17. And Devlin Hodges coming in for Mason Rudolph. Luckily, Mason Rudolph will probably get cleared in the next couple of weeks. So that's good to see from what a hard hit he had against the Ravens. But 132 yards for Devlin Hodges. And what really killed the Chargers, in my opinion, Melvin Gordon, his first game back, essentially, and he only got 18 yards on 8 carries. The run game was non-existent, and Phillip Rivers had 2 interceptions. So turnovers played a huge part in this victory for the Pittsburgh Steelers in that Sunday night game. And can they hold it down until Mason Rudolph gets back? Next week they have a bye week, so they can prepare, be healthy for the next week's game after that. But Devlin Hodges looked all right until Mason Rudolph can get back. And Mike Tomlin, they're trying to find a way for him to be a successful coach with what he has, but it's very hard when Ben Roethlisberger's out for the season and Mason Rudolph is in the concussion protocol. So, other score lines: the Ravens over the Bengals, 23-17 there. The Vikings and the Philadelphia Eagles, 38-20. Funny story in this one: Zach Brown, a former Redskin, yeah, believe it or not, said Kirk Cousins is the weakest part of the Minnesota Vikings, or something like that. I can't quote it exactly, but I think that's around what he said. But he said he's the weakest part of the offense. Then Kirk Cousins in this game at home goes out, throws 4 touchdowns, 333 yards, and the Eagles looked all right, but the Vikings showed the Eagles what they were really about, and they essentially silenced Zach Brown. Kirk Cousins essentially silenced Zach Brown, excuse me. I'm sorry. I said Mac Brown. But anyways, then reports state that today Zach Brown got released. So, interesting development there. A lot of teams could be looking into Mac Brown for free agency. So, that, and I'm not sure what else. I think we basically talked about everything there. New England beat New York, turnover on the Thursday night game, 35-14. But other than that, I think I covered it all. There was a London game, the Carolina Panthers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 37-26, Carolina with a win. So that wraps up my Week 6 storylines. Coming up next, we have Fantasy Football Files with Jason Kamlowski, and when we return, I will have MLB playoffs updates from the NL and ALCS, getting you set for the World Series. Who will make it to the World Series? You're listening to the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. We'll be back shortly.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Week 7 Fantasy Football Files. This is Jason Kamlowski from Dynasty Football Digest, coming to you from my basement where I'm watching a little bit of Wednesday Night Football right now. As always, I want to thank Josh for having me on, and just want to say congratulations to him and all of the city of Washington for the Nationals getting to the World Series, man. That's absolutely awesome. Big thing for the city. You know, actually, I'm a Pirates fan in baseball, but I really don't mind the Nationals that much. I like going down to Nats Park. I went down there earlier this year and caught a game during a midweek afternoon. if you ride the Metro in, it's not bad to get in there. They've done a great job building up around the stadium. So I actually really kind of dig, what the Nationals have going on. And it's just kind of cool to see what they've done this year. They lose Bryce Harper last offseason, which was just tough. And, but then they add obviously Patrick Corbin, and that's kind of worked out exactly how I think they probably thought it would, with Scherzer, Strasburg, and Corbin to kind of, get them through the playoffs. I mean, those three, especially Strasburg, he's just been so good this year, but those three have kind of done, I think exactly what management probably thought that they were going to do. So, just a lot of props to the Nationals, and for Nationals fans, congratulations, because, that's a really cool thing. As a Pirates fan, I'm definitely envious of, how they've kind of kept that thing going despite losing a guy like Bryce Harper. So, the Nationals are probably the one team in Washington I can fully get behind, not a big Capitals guy. Well, actually, I hate the Capitals. I'm a Pens fan. The Redskins really, honestly, aren't really worth even talking about. I can get on board with the Wizards. I like going down and watching NBA games. That's kind of cool because growing up near Pittsburgh, we didn't have an NBA team, so I kind of get on board with the Wizards. But yeah, congratulations to all you Nats fans out there. That's awesome. So. Just kind of doing what we normally do here, recapping a little bit of Week 6 stuff. Last week was, we saw last week, it started off kind of with the London game Sunday morning, and Jameis Winston just so bad, 400 yards, 5 interceptions, just absolutely horrific. But even the thing is with him throwing 5 interceptions, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and I've said this on here before, I think Chris Godwin is the wide receiver 1 in Tampa Bay. Right now he's a wide receiver 1 in fantasy overall, but, him and Evans, when they have this kind of volume, when they're throwing the ball 50 sometimes a game, that can support two wide receivers for fantasy purposes. And obviously Evans had a blow-up game a couple weeks ago, and then, went, I think, 9 for 96 on Sunday. And Godwin had just a monster day, 10 for 150 yards. Didn't get in the end zone, but, whether it's a PPR or not, that'll play all day. As long as Bruce Arians is there, they're going to throw the ball. They don't really have, obviously the running game. So, Tampa, it is what it is. They're bad in real life, but for fantasy purposes, that's kind of exactly what we want. A defense that's very average, and, an offense that just loves to put the ball in the air. So, keep going back to the well with those guys. Jameis, obviously, with the interceptions, you never know what you're going to get with him from week to week. But, with this type of volume, Jameis is obviously a guy that, you've got to consider, with bye weeks coming up and things like that. You could do way worse. So, and this is kind of the point in the season where we get into, believe it or not, in some leagues, the regular season is probably half over. Moving into week 7, I know some regular seasons end, after week 12. So we're kind of at that halfway point. And I've had some questions, and this is kind of getting off of what we normally do here, but I've had some questions this week about, from some people who have either, DM me on Twitter or sent me text messages, people I know. And kind of the neat thing about my day job of being a principal is, I get to meet so many different people, students and teachers and, people from around the different counties. So, sometimes the questions I'm getting are from former students, which is kind of cool. But, I'm getting some questions where, people are sending me their rosters and they're like, I'm 1-5, I'm 2-4, what do I need to be doing? Where is this going wrong? And it's like, well, your team's just underperforming. And, I've told a couple people, some of this stuff, for better or worse, is just luck. The one roster I looked at, somebody sent me, they had Odell Beckham Jr. on their team, and, they had like Josh Gordon on their team, who they probably picked up late. And they had Ezekiel Elliott on their team, and if you drafted or managed to either, draft and obviously probably keep either Zeke or Odell Beckham Jr., you've just kind of run into a string of bad luck with those guys. I think everybody coming in thought, Beckham would just be like this ridiculous, wide receiver now that he's finally playing with a real quarterback. But, and I've talked about this before, and we've talked about this the last couple of weeks, just the Browns at their price coming into the year was just, you were talking like a top 5% outcome for these guys to all hit. And honestly, I thought Beckham would probably be the one that was least likely to not hit. But, when you look at the teams that you have and, you wonder, just, kind of, how did I get here, from a record standpoint? I mean, some of it is just, it's not that you even drafted poorly. It's just, you're just unlucky because between injuries and guys just not producing the way we thought they were going to produce, unfortunately, sometimes these things happen. And I've built fantasy teams before, and I've come out of the draft and I've thought, this team's really, really strong. And, I've basically been at a point where I'm, 1-5, 2-4, 3-3 after 6 weeks. And it's tough to, it's a tough pill to swallow because you feel like you did so many things right on draft night. But, probably one of the better teams that I have right now, it's a one keeper league, and I kept Dalvin Cook, which the main reason I kept Dalvin Cook was because Melvin Gordon was holding out. And had Melvin Gordon not been holding out, I probably would have kept Melvin Gordon, which would have been a mistake. So, I get lucky because Gordon holds out, and, I keep Dalvin Cook. And, in the first round of that draft, I took David Johnson, who's been reasonable. I mean, for a first round pick, he's been pretty good. I can't say he's been what I thought he was going to be, but he's been solid for a first round pick. I mean, the floor has definitely been there, and I mean it's obviously helped his receiving usage, and the Cardinals passing games obviously helped. So he's had a weekly floor, typically around 14 to 15 points and a half point PPR. But like even Zach Ertz, who I took in the third round, I mean, he's been very average. I thought Zach Ertz would be much better than what he is, but he's been very average. But where I've really got lucky is, I did draft Chris Godwin, I did draft Lamar Jackson, I got Tyler Boyd, who's had a couple ceiling weeks, and then on top of that, I picked up DJ Shark. So, some of it is, I thought Jackson had a chance. I thought Lamar Jackson had a chance to hit. I think I took him in like the 13th or 14th round of this league, and this is a 12-team redraft league with one keeper. But, to get Lamar Jackson in the 12th or 13th round, I mean, I think you can make a case right now for Lamar Jackson being, the number 3 or 4 quarterback in fantasy. But those are the type of things that happen, and when you get in a situation where you draft someone like Lamar Jackson, you draft someone like Chris Godwin, and honestly, like the team I'm talking about right now, I mean, I'm probably hitting a top 5% outcome with them. Godwin's the best, the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. Jackson's like the number 2 quarterback in fantasy right now. I mean, I expected both of those guys to perform. I did not expect them to perform like this. And you throw in Dalvin Cook, who's I think the number 2 running back in fantasy. I mean, it's no wonder this team is 5-1. But, the thing is, some other teams that you look at, like the one that I was telling you guys about with Beckham and Zeke, I mean, it's hard to forecast that out and say that those two are going to just, be so, and I don't want to say bad, but just so average. I mean, they both of those teams have just been so, grotesquely average. And Zeke was probably a number 1 pick for a lot of people overall, and you're just not getting the production out of him, and the Cowboys have been bad for the last 3 weeks. So if you're depending on guys like that, I mean, some of that, it's not that you did anything wrong, on draft night. I mean, who wouldn't look at, Zeke Elliott as a top 5 pick? But if you took him in the top 5, and the rest of your draft was just kind of iffy, I mean, you're going to have a hard time rebounding from that unless you get 2 or 3 guys that can make up the point value that you missed out on if you took Zeke over someone like Christian McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara, or Devontae Adams before he got hurt. So, when we're looking at our fantasy teams, I think now is a good time to adjust where you're at because, in most leagues, unless you're 0-6 or 1-5, you're still in the hunt. Like one of my biggest leagues right now, half the league is sitting at 3-3. It's a 12-team league and half the teams are sitting at 3-3. So, and we've got a 1-5 team and 2 2-4 teams, and everybody else is 3-3 or 4-2 and 5-1. So, of the 12 teams in the league, 9 of them are at 3-3 or better, which, it just gives everybody a chance. And even honestly, the 2-4 teams can't feel that bad about where they are, because if they win a game this week and a couple teams lose, they're kind of at a point where, they're going to be, stuck in kind of this 3-4 logjam. So, I think it's one of those things where, like, this is a good time to kind of reset yourself. If you're at that point where you're 0-6, you're 1-5, and you're in a keeper league, I think you've got to make some decisions coming up, because, at some point you've just got to decide to start working towards next year. And if you've got some assets you can trade off and get yourself a better keeper, I think that's definitely something that you need to be looking to do. In our Slack chat today, I think somebody mentioned that they had a chance to get Alvin Kamara for Alvin Kamara for Le'Veon Bell, and I think it was Michael Gallup. And I said 100% do that deal. Get Kamara. He's the best player in the deal by far. Yes, you're giving up Lev Bell back end wide receiver 1. Yes, you're giving up Michael Gallup, wide receiver 2 with upside, but still, I think anytime, you can, if you're a team that's, like I said, 1-5, 0-6. If you're after this week, if you're 0-7 or 1-6, I think those are the type of deals in a redraft league with a keeper or two that you kind of look to make to see if you can get a better keeper for next year, and you just do that, and you just scrap this year, and you say, you know what, you don't tank per se, but you try to get yourself somebody who's better than maybe anybody else you have in your roster, even if it means trading off 2 or 3 pieces to somebody. And of course, that'll upset people in your league. And, just to be clear, you shouldn't care about that. Vetoes are terrible. Nobody should really, I think if you're playing fantasy and you're paying your money with everybody else, I think everybody should just kind of agree to the fact that you're all grown men, and, vetoes are ridiculous. But, I just think those are the types of moves you need to be making, because at some point, playing for this year it just becomes something that you just can't realistically do. So, take a hard look at your team, take a hard look at yourself, and go back through your draft. I do this every year. I go back through my drafts and I say, who did I take and who could I have taken? Instead, if they didn't work out, and maybe try to see where I made mistakes and try to see where I can do better next year. And truthfully, the only thing you can do is learn, and try to get better. So, that might be something for those of you out there that, maybe your season's not going quite the way you hoped it would. Just a little bit of advice to maybe try to position yourself better next year. At least start out with one stud player, but that's always been something I've tried to do in leagues that, maybe it is not working out quite the way I thought it was going to. So, position yourself for 2020. There's no shame in it. If you're in a state where you can do this, go throw $100 on FanDuel or DraftKings and, start playing the daily stuff, because that stuff's fun too. And there's a little bit of strategy involved there, and, it'll take the sting out of this a little bit. And, you can play that all the way to the Super Bowl. So at least give you something to do. So, just looking at this week coming up, and just recapping some things from last week. You already talked Jameis. The game in Arizona, it definitely was a shootout, which I think a lot of people saw coming. For DFS purposes, I played Matt Ryan and Kyler Murray last week, which definitely worked out. I play in a league, and I might have mentioned this. I play in a league where you pick one guy, and you can't use him the rest of the year, and it's over the course of 16 weeks. And over that course of 16 weeks, you've got to use 4 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 5 receivers, 2 tight ends, and 2 defenses. And last week I used Matt Ryan, which really worked out. And I've had a week where I used Keenan Allen. That one really worked out. So that's kind of a fun league. But yeah, last week in Arizona, that game kind of played out the way we thought that it would. From a passing standpoint, I think it's a little easier sometimes with some of these teams having a more narrow route tree, to kind of nail down and see where we want to attack these defenses and see what we can do. Obviously, I think most of the time, the Atlanta defense is definitely an attackable defense. Same thing with Arizona. They just run so many plays. teams have a lot of opportunities for them to, to score a lot of points. Kirk Cousins obviously, had a monster game. Stephon Diggs coming back, rising from the dead. I kind of saw that one coming a little bit, just kind of the squeaky wheel narrative there with Diggs. And, he's kind of been begging for the ball the last couple of weeks and sitting out of practice and things like that. Cousins had one of those ceiling weeks last week, but he only threw the ball 29 times, which, just crazy efficiency, 333 yards, 4 touchdowns, just stupid good efficiency. If he could get to like 35 pass attempts, I would be much more enamored with Kirk Cousins, but the ceiling just isn't there when it comes to pass attempts. So, if he can get Diggs more involved, that's a good thing, because Diggs is the big play guy in that offense, and Thielen's obviously the underneath guy and the possession guy. But, Cousins is probably available out there if you're willing to kick the tires on somebody, but I still think this is a run-first offense. The Vikings schedule is kind of favorable coming up. They avoid the Bears, I believe, until week 17, so, you wouldn't have to worry about them. But I just think with the way Mike Zimmer wants to play, it's just so hard to trust anybody else in that offense outside of maybe Thielen and Dalvin Cook. So, kind of tread lightly there. I would still be real careful with what I do with that offense. If you drafted Thielen, you drafted Diggs, I think you've got to start both of them weekly. Obviously, you're going to start Dalvin Cook every week. The tight ends are unusable there, but I think the decision you might have to make is with like a Kirk Cousins, and maybe he's a matchup play for you depending on where you went with quarterback. But, just a great week last week. I think you also got to talk, Russell Wilson, 295 yards passing, 2 touchdowns going into Cleveland. He's probably the MVP of the league right now. Russ is just having one of those, just a great year. And that whole Seattle offense has kind of played well. Chris Carson had a monster game. I played him last week on FanDuel and DraftKings. I think I had him in 100% of my lineups. But, Carson was just insane last week with 124 yards and a touchdown. He got involved in the passing game. So if you had him in a PPR, he was like a 25-point PPR guy last week, which is just a monster game. Talking a little bit about Lamar Jackson, he's like, I think the third quarterback in history, though, to throw for 250 yards in a game and then run for 150 yards in a game. What he's doing is just incredible. He was actually the league's leading rusher last week. And, I wasn't sure that he would get to 1,000 yards rushing this year. But honestly, it looks like he has an outside chance of doing that. And I don't know that he'll get the volume down the stretch, because especially if it looks like the Ravens might win that division, and, they're going to get to the playoffs and they're going to need, Lamar Jackson to be healthy for the playoffs. They may limit his workload a little bit, but, he's just doing some incredible things at the quarterback position right now. Obviously if you own him, you love it. I would not suggest selling him. I think everything he's doing is for real. I think he can keep it up over the course of the season. In my biggest money league, I have no intentions of getting rid of him. So, Lamar Jackson, if you drafted him, congratulations, good work. And enjoy it. So, looking at some running backs, already talked Carson. On the other side of that game, Nick Chubb, 122 yards, 2 touchdowns. He just ran all over Seattle. Kind of an odd spot for him last week. Not somebody that I definitely would have said is 100% a startable guy. I think for Chubb, he's kind of in that position though, where if you have him, you're starting him. But, if you had, maybe a possible better option, maybe you could look at that. But I didn't think the matchup was great. But again, he got it done, which kind of seems to be his shtick, is that he'll not do so well in some of the easier matchups, and then he blows up in a matchup like this. So good for Nick Chubb. Adrian Peterson, the donkey Bill Callahan said that they wanted to run the ball more, and they did against Miami. Somehow Adrian Peterson managed to get 23 carries last week. I don't understand it, but they won the game. Just 2 of the worst teams in football, but Adrian Peterson's like 130 years old still doing this, so good on him. Carlos Hyde had a really nice game though. Speaking of guys that are a little older, Hyde had a really nice week last week. Went over 100 yards on the ground, a couple touchdowns. I think he got one through the air maybe, or maybe not, but I know he definitely scored the one on the ground. And Hyde has kind of been a nice find this year for the Texans. They picking him up, obviously how they did, but he's kind of been a nice find for them. So, Carlos Hyde coming through, last week, and I think he's one of those guys where maybe he's like a fringe starter for you every week. And again, like, I don't think last week was the matchup that I would have suggested starting him. I would have went, Duke Johnson all day over Carlos Hyde last week, just because I thought, that game would kind of go into shootout mode, which it did, but it seems like teams were trying to run the ball against the Chiefs to keep Mahomes off the field. So I guess in hindsight, that was a bad call on my part, because Hyde would be the perfect back for that, to kind of keep the Chiefs offense off the field. 26 carries is, that's a healthy carry count. So, I don't know that he's going to get that every week, but if you can get him on those peak weeks and you can kind of get those ceiling games from him, Carlos Hyde is definitely a good fantasy asset. So, we talked about Zeke Elliott, just 3.8 yards per carry against the Jets. Just horrific. And the Jets just really took it to the Cowboys for most of the afternoon. They came out pretty fired up, I think. A little disappointed in the Cowboys showing altogether. I know Mark Cooper got hurt, so Gallup was kind of out there running around as the number one receiver, and it just didn't look right. It's hard to say what's going to happen with Coop. It doesn't look like he's going to play this week, so they'll be down, potentially in Mark Cooper. Hopefully Gallup can step up and have a good week this week. Maybe we see Randall Cobb get into things. But, I would think that they would start to lean on Zeke a little bit more, in the passing game. But it just seems like they're content with just running him straight into the line. I just don't understand Jason Garrett, and I probably never will. Speaking of coaches, I don't understand. Jamal Williams, 104 yards on 14 carries. Play Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones, and this is why I suggested trading Aaron Jones after the ceiling week against Dallas, was because they're just intent on running Jamal Williams, which I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't get it. Aaron Jones is legitimately good. He can do a lot of things with a football in his hand, and yet we are going to come out and give Jamal Williams 14 carries and give Aaron Jones 11 a week after he scored 4 touchdowns against I just don't get it. I don't understand it. But, NFL coaches, you just can't understand what they do. James Conner had a big game Sunday night. Got back into the receiving role, too. 7 catches, 78 yards, which honestly, it sounds like that's kind of what the Steelers are going to do, no matter if it's Rudolph or Duck Hodges back there. Sounds like they're going to run these short routes. So I'd say Conner is going to be heavily involved. I know Benny Snell, I think, got 14 carries last Sunday. But, I would say that's more of an exception than a rule, because I can't see them continuing to give him 14 carries. I think Conner is going to be the back to own there. Just looking down through, Deshaun Watson, he has a quarterback, him, and, you kind of talk about him in the same breath as Lamar Jackson a little bit, but he had 10 carries for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns, which, put him in, would have put him in RB1 territory for last week. Latavius Murray had a nice game, only got 8 carries, but, ran for 44 yards, which is a healthy 5.5 yards per carry. If someone happened to Alvin Kamara, Murray might be a league winner. So, keep him on your radar as somebody, maybe if you've got a back-end roster spot and you're in the playoff hunt, maybe keep him in mind. Dalvin Cook had a down week. He did fall into the end zone. He's still getting involvement in the pass game, which is good. Had higher hopes for Lev Bell than 14 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown. Also didn't do a whole lot in the passing game. I thought Bell would have a bigger game, especially given what Aaron Jones did a week before. Sony Michel, 22 carries for 86 yards. Somehow Tom Brady scored like 8 touchdowns on just 1-yard dive plays, which made no sense to me. But, Michelle, that's a good sign to get 22 carries for 86 yards for him. That's a good sign for him. A couple others. Mark Ingram, which I think honestly was probably a little disappointing with just the 13 carries for 52 yards against Cincinnati. I thought for sure if there was never an opportunity for him to get 52 carries, that would have been it. But it seemed like somebody wanted to steal his helmet or something. I don't know. It's just odd what happened there. Maybe, not steal his helmet, but steal carries. John Harbaugh just does some weird things, though, putting like Gus Edwards in like the goal line. And honestly, they almost blew it. because the Bengals had a chance to onside kick late, and I just thought, you know what, you're going to get what you deserve here, Harbaugh. I hope they get this and they go down and score. For running Gus Edwards straight into the line 3 straight times and kicking a field goal. It's just so conservative sometimes from him. I mean, I want to like Harbaugh, but I just can't. Receiver-wise, we talked Diggs, we talked Godwin. Robbie Anderson had a big game, 5 for 25 and a touchdown, or 5 for 125 and a touchdown. Kind of got behind the Dallas defense for like an 82-yard touchdown, which made up most of his yardage in his touchdown that day. Same thing with Kenny Golladay, 5 for $121. Austin Hooper continues just crush the tight end position, 8 for $117 and a touchdown. Edelman had a big game last week. Julio quietly had 100 yards against Arizona. George Kittle starting to get going. Even Golden Tate got into the action with 102 yards and a touchdown. Odell Beckham had a nice game, probably one of his better games of the year. He cleared 100 yards last week. I know it wasn't really what we were probably hoping for. We were probably hoping for more touchdowns and things like that. But you still got to be encouraged by the fact he's getting to 100 yards, and I know he's being targeted pretty heavy. But probably there's one wide receiver that I really want to talk about, and that's Terry McLaurin, who just continues to put up these huge games, these huge numbers. 4 catches, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. I know it's against Miami, but I mean he's been doing this all year, week in, week out. And, he's a Washington guy, and got to give love to the Redskins because, honestly, I mean, he's just really good at getting open. I think as long as Case Keenum's the quarterback, I mean, he's going to continue to be good. And obviously if you owned him, I mean, the price on him was probably not prohibitive at all. I mean, in some dynasty leagues I'm in rookie drafts, he was going in like the 3rd or 4th round, which is low for a rookie draft. But I love Terry McLaurin, love him, F1. I mean, which is what I think he wants his nickname to be. I don't think he cares for Scary Terry, but Tyreek Hill got back in action. I mean, the one catch he had was absolutely absurd. Just went up and just hung in the air and absolutely just took a ball, off the I think it was Tyrann Mathieu of the Texans. I mean, it's just a ridiculous catch. But he goes 5 for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. He would be a guy that I would be looking to get on my roster if I could, but it looks like the window for that is probably closed. Alshon Jeffrey, 10 catches, 76 yards and a touchdown. It's like the most Alshon Jeffrey line in the history of Alshon Jeffrey lines. Just absolutely no after the catch for him whatsoever. And receivers always you just have so many productive receivers out there. When I did my waivers this week, I mean, honestly, I'm like the number 2 priority in my biggest league, and I didn't even go for anybody just because I knew there'd be so many guys out there that I could, maybe try to burn a roster spot for. So just a lot of receivers out there to produce. But again, let's go back to just one thing we talked about earlier. Look at where your team's at. See what your needs are. If you are in a position where you think that, you're 1-5, 0-6, and your season's either drawing to an end or is already over. If you're drawing dead, then try to go out, get yourself a better keeper for next year. Package some guys together. Try to make another team stronger without completely just taking their best player from them and making them bad. But I mean that's a strategy to employ. And then if you are 5-1, 4-2, 6-0. I think you've got to be looking at ways to improve probably the back end of your roster as much as anything. Being a David Johnson owner, being a Dalvin Cook owner, I own both of their handcuffs, which, I've never been like a huge handcuff guy, but I think in the way things are now, to me, it'd be a real shame to run through like 12 games and be really good and then have like Dalvin Cook go down with like a broken collarbone. I'd have to just scramble for a backup or hope I had a high enough waiver priority to get his backup. So rather than do that, I've already got him on the back end of my roster, which, not everybody will agree with, but I think it's just important to have that, and I've got the room. So, I may as well do it. But, look at your roster this week. See where you can improve. See if there's guys that maybe you can get that might solidify a spot. If you're weak, everybody's weak at tight end, but if you're weak at like your RB2 or your wide receiver 2-3, package a guy together with somebody else, or send one guy who you think is an upgrade to the other owner for whatever reason for 2 maybe 2 guys to help your own roster. And I think I wouldn't be content. I mean, that's how you lose. If you get to 6-0, 5-1, and you think, I'm just going to cruise to the playoffs, that's not a good mindset to be in. I mean, this is a time when we're starting to make a push, and we want to get you guys to the finish line, hopefully with a championship in your hand. So, those are the things that I'm looking to do in my own leagues this year or this week. I've made a couple deals already, nothing major. Mostly small deals where I'm just trying to flip some older guys in Dynasty for some draft picks. But, be looking at your teams, make decisions that are going to, hopefully affect you, down the road, maybe 3-4 weeks. I mean, be proactive, and just be trying to improve, whether it's for this year, for next year, whatever it is. So, we're halfway there in the regular season for the most part, but we're going to keep cranking this out. Again, I want to thank Josh for having me on. Nationals fans, congratulations. Steelers fans, which I'm one of them, congratulations on our big win Sunday night. But, that's pretty much all I've got for Week 7, and we will see you next week for Week 8. Best of luck this week. Hope everybody gets a win.
The Josh Kirby on Sports podcast, part of the Mayo Please podcast network, is sponsored by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you grab a bag today inside your local Martin's, Food Lion, and Giant stores. And our new sponsor and fellow sports fans at PM Plus Reserves, providing reserve studies for homeowner and condominium associations in the Washington metropolitan area for the past 30 years. Make sure you check us out on all streaming platforms via the Mayo Please and the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. You can also find the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, along with the Mayo Please on Twitter. Have any questions for the show? Feel free to shoot us an email at kirbyonsports@gmail.com.
Back with you on the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast, as always, brought to you by Route 11 Chips and PM Plus Reserves. Thanks once again to Jason Kamlowski each and every week for doing fantasy football files, as always. So getting right back into it, before we went to the break, I totally forgot to mention the Monday Night Football game, the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions. Green Bay with a 24-yard field goal to win the game. And there was some questionable officiating that the NFL admitted today that they were wrong, and there were 2 calls that shouldn't have been called. So I don't really have a stance on that, because I know officials are humans. They make mistakes, but it gave the Packers the win. The NFL admitted that, but the thing is, they make mistakes, and officials can't be perfect. That's my stance on things. But I've seen a lot of people mad about this, and Packers ended up winning because of it. There were 2 late penalties that shouldn't have been called, and it came down to the fact that the Packers won off of it. And a lot of fans are angry about that, but it's just life. But I feel sorry for the Lions. They played a heck of a great game, a division matchup. You can never go wrong with a Monday night division matchup in the NFC North. So, very great game nonetheless. I thought the Lions were going to take it there for a little while, but Aaron Rodgers coming back, doing what he does best, and winning football games, and set Mason Crosby up for a game-winning field goal. So, yeah, I forgot to touch on that previously. Just wanted to touch on that now. But moving on, I want to talk about playoff baseball. The Nats have defeated the Los Angeles Dodgers, and what a game that was. It went into 10 innings, and there was a walk-off, not a walk-off, what was it? Just an amazing grand slam. I thought it was a walk-off for some reason, but Howie Kendrick, what a guy. With the bases loaded in the 10th inning, with a grand slam. And you know how the Nats are notorious for not getting out of the division series. the Dodgers were up 3-0 for the most part of that baseball game, and the Nats came back, and as the Nationals' motto, what they like to say, they're still in the fight. They're staying in the fight. And Howie Kendrick was a big part. They walked Soto to get Kendrick up to load the bases and knock the game wide open, 7-3. The Nationals, for the first time in franchise history, are moving on to a championship series. They ended up playing the St. Louis Cardinals, who beat the Braves to clinch the championship series 13-1. And what a game that was, the Nats and the Dodgers. But what's even more surprising, the Nats have not won one, not won two, but won 3 in a row in the series against St. Louis. Beat St. Louis twice on the road. They won the game last night in Washington, and they are playing tonight at 8:05 as we are recording. Tonight, they're 3-0 in the series. If they win tonight, the Nationals are going to the World Series, and that's amazing. Well, the history from the Capitals, what fanmanship, the fan base, everything about that ride the Capitals had, that they won the Stanley Cup. It's about to happen all over again if the Nats win this ball game. And it's just a different atmosphere, and the fans that are going to come out, the fan base is going to grow and grow if the Nationals make it to the World Series. And before, it was more iconic when the Capitals won, because it was the first DC championship in who knows how long. But now you have the Nationals, who are falling right behind the Capitals and could bring another championship to DC. So DC fans are getting very excited for this opportunity, I have to say, and I will be buckled in. I cannot wait to see the result of this game, as always. So, Nats 3-0 against the St. Louis Cardinals. And the Cardinals are trying everything they can to win this baseball game. They're making moves left and right, pulling people up, sitting people on the bench. So the Cardinals are on their last leg today. But if the Cardinals manage to pull out a game today, there's another game tomorrow in Washington. So Washington has about 4 more games to win one more to go to the World Series. So if the St. Louis Cardinals pull off this comeback and make it to the World Series, that's a big choke job. But if the Nationals can stay strong, their pitching has looked great. They have not had to go into the bullpen that much this series, which is great, because I was worried about the bullpen throughout this series, but they put Corbin in on relief. I remember Scherzer came in on a few relief appearances in the last series against Los Angeles, but then you have Daniel Hudson and Sean Doolittle, two of the top closers for the Nationals, and they're trying to make history, and it's going to be fun to watch. The Nats and the St. Louis Cardinals on tonight, 8:05. The Astros and the Yankees on the American League side of things. Astros tied it up 1-1 in the series after a Carlos Correa 11th inning walk-off home run before sending the series back to New York. That game is currently going on as we are recording, top of the 5th, and the Houston Astros are winning 2-0 right now. So if the Nationals manage to pull this win off tonight, they might have a long break to determine who the Nationals might play in the World Series between the Houston Astros and the New York Yankees. So Astros, best record in baseball. They have a great pitcher in Justin Verlander. And you know the Yankees, the history of the Yankees. It's it's going to be an iconic series between the Houston Astros and the New York Yankees. They have played in the NLCS before, so this isn't new, but it's always a battle between the Astros and the Yankees in years past in the playoffs. So that's playoff baseball for you. Playoff baseball, that's as exciting as it's going to get for you. So I can't wait. We will have updates to come next week for sure. So I just cannot wait to see the result of how this series is going to go. Who's going to make it to the World Series? Then the World Series, it's just iconic, amazing. October baseball, playoff baseball is a totally different atmosphere. So enough ranting with that. Moving on to my last topic before we wrap things up. The Nationals have a chance of getting to the World Series. But before that happened, the Washington Mystics made history, running it back with their first ever WNBA title. Yes, indeed. Last year, the Mystics were in the finals but fell short. This year, their motto was run it back in the playoffs. They ran it back against the Connecticut Sun and won the title. And another big championship for DC Sports there. So congratulations to the Washington Mystics there. But Elena Del Don, their power player for the Mystics, is throwing out the first pitch. So hopefully a little magic in the DC sports world going into tonight's game. But that about wraps things up for this episode of the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. I told you there's a lot to talk about here. So, yep, I appreciate you all listening. As always, you can catch us on the Mayo Please and the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast on all streaming platforms. As always, we're part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network, brought to you by Red 11 Chips and PM Plus Reserves. Thanks, as always, to JRB's official, MPT Now Productions, and Dave Johnson for everything you do for the podcast. And until next week, the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast saying so long, and we will catch you on the next episode. Peace out.